Hello, everybody, and welcome to Red Wings Daily, presented to you by FanArch. I'm your host, Kirk MckNight, author of The Voices of Hockey. Broadcasters reflect on the fastest game on earth, and coming to you from the southwest corner of Washington State, 2,454 miles from Little Caesars Arena. Now, LCA will be the site of the Red Wings Canucks tonight. This is the first game back in LCA for the Red Wings since losing 4-1 to the Penguins last Saturday. Luckily, they had a little bit of some redemption on the road, beating the Senators 5-3 on Monday. But sitting now at second in the Atlantic Division, the Red Wings are at 25-15-4. Now the Canucks are at last in the Pacific Division with a record of 16-21-5. Now the Pacific and the Atlantic Divisions, looking them over top to bottom, they're kind of a tale of two of the same kind of situation. They're kind of cut from the same fabric. There's basically 11 points that separate first from eighth in the Pacific, and there's 10 points that separate first from eighth in the Atlantic. Talking a little bit about the matchup, this is the second of two between the two teams. The Red Wings won last month 4-0. It was one of Gibby's shutouts. It was the second road trip back west for the Red Wings this season. It was amidst their three-game winning streak against Seattle, Vancouver, and Calgary. And looking at the difference in between the two teams, the goals forced differential isn't as much as I would have thought. Detroit's at 136 goals forced, and Vancouver's at 120 goals forced. Now, goals allowed differential is a little bit it's probably just as close, actually. No, Detroit's at 141 goals allowed, and Vancouver's at 148. Just goes to show, it's a difference of 9 wins between the two teams, yet only 7 goals allowed and, 16 goals forced. That kind of makes a difference, especially because the Red Wings keep these games pretty close a lot of the times. They haven't really run away from any victories as of yet too many times in the league this year. So those kinds of things kind of stand out. But, with the Wings looking to get 2 more points, basically, because with Tampa Bay winning their 8th straight the other night, Red Wings are basically sitting at second and hoping to, climb back up and get back into a bit of a streak, maybe, if you will. Try to keep the momentum going. They won the one in Ottawa. We'll see if they can move forward, especially as we get closer and closer to some of these more competitive games. But don't overlook the Canucks. This is... I like to use the term trap game when it comes to football, and maybe hockey. There isn't such a thing as trap game so much, but a lot of times when you're looking at an opponent coming down the line, Montreal is going to be up next for the Red Wings, I believe, after Vancouver, and that's going to be a tough one. That's going to be a dogfight. So you don't want to basically overlook this matchup looking towards the next one, because Vancouver is just as capable of beating us and surprising us as the Predators were a few weeks back when they destroyed us in our own building. So don't overlook anybody looking to the game beyond, because the game in front of you is really the 2 points that are up for grabs right there are all that's important, and they're what's going to count towards the end of the year. So Vancouver, not going to take it for granted. Hopefully, my least favorite player, Kane, can behave himself and not get any of our guys in the hospital. So, looking over the lines, I've been noticing that there's been a little bit of a change-up on the special teams. I've noticed that Showtime isn't on the first power play line anymore. It's JVR there with Larkin and DeBrincat and Seider and Raymond. So it's changed up a little bit. JVR's got the hot hand, which is great. Now Showtime, one thing though I will say I appreciate about this though is Showtime's now on the second power play unit with Axel and Finns. Sitting there working with those rookies, helping them in their special teams, getting them that kind of tutelage that they could use moving up. So speaking of Finns has moved up to the first line with Larks and Casper, which is great. And the second line now is featuring Kopp, Cat, and Showtime. We're talking offensively, guys. So first line offensively, I said, Larks, Casper, and Finns. Second line, I already said Kopp, Cat, and Showtime. Now third line, we got JVR, Comfer, and Raymond. Now that's a very hot line right now, especially with JVR and Raymond. Those guys are getting points here and there. The Kopp moving up to the second line, I will say, you can see that he's been scoring. He's been pretty hot lately. He's been effective in games, so he's basically kind of earned himself moving up the lines that way. So fourth line though, we've got Big Raz, Appy, and John Leonard. So I'm kind of liking the offensive switch up as it is. Like I said, keep the hot hand in there. Obviously, you're always going to see something out of Seider. Speaking of Seider, he and Eds are on the first line defensively, and Eds has got the hot hand too. So keeping the hot hand out there with more time. Mo obviously has been such a catalyst for us, especially since late November. And then, Eds and Mo. Eds and Mo sounds like a 90s sitcom. But on the second line, we got Sherratt and Axel, and then Aljo and Doc on the third. So the lines have changed up a little bit. I do like those kinds of things happening because we're at a point where we don't want to gamble too much and we don't want to slide down the rankings or not, but we also are at a point where we need to see how we go situation wise moving forward in the season as we get near to, like I said, these more prime time and show and marquee matchups against the Atlantic teams like the Canadiens and the Lightning. We're going to have to face them again. We're going to have to face the Maple Leafs, where that wouldn't seem like such a big deal, but they've been hot too. So they've been making their way back up the division. The Panthers are always going to be a threat, and we still got to play them a couple more times. So I'm all about making some of these switches and seeing what works and going with hot hand, especially when the offense sometimes struggles getting out the gate, maybe getting in those holes that they've been doing and having to overcome in the second and third period to actually make something of it, make a point or 2 points out of it. But I'm always trusting of McClellan. I'm never questioning of his decisions like I used to be with Lalonde and Blashill. So it's good moving forward, and we'll just see how everything shakes out. I always say that in my shows. We'll see how everything shakes out, but hopefully it shakes out with the Red Wings on top. Now, speaking of Red Wings on top, we just mentioned the fact that Showtime is now on the second power play line working with the Rooks. So Showtime's only had one goal. He's only had 1 point since he's come back from his 6-game stint. I don't want to call it the IR because it wasn't the IR, but after being 6 games with the upper body problems, he's only had 1 point, and honestly, that point was kind of a freakish point. Like I said, it was he got an assist on that bounce off of the boards that basically set up. Was that the one that set up Kopp? Anyway, yeah, in the Penguins game. So, like I said, he's probably due, and I like to think that it's a little prophetic sometimes in these shows, because sometimes I'll say Larks is due, or I've said more recently that DeBrincat is due, and guess what? He scores 2 straight goals in 2 straight games. So I always want to say that Patrick Kane is due, because I would like to see him get those 7 points to tie him with Modano and then move forward and then pass Modano and then distance himself with Modano in the rearview mirror as far as U.S.-born players and points in NHL history. But a lot of what's on people's minds in the closer future, which is, the more assists he gets, it seems like both might actually happen on the same, day. He might get his point that passes Modano might actually be his 500th goal the way it's going, with him getting assists without the goals. But Vancouver might be a good opportunity for Kane to get 1 or 2 in tonight's game. So we'll see if we'll always be on 500 watch with him, especially if he scores early. And the crowd's going to be waiting for that, hoping that more and more fireworks happen before they go on the road, and they don't want him to get those milestones on the road unless it's in a original 6 city, obviously. But that's all about Kane, though. He's an original 6 player. He's played on 3 original 6 teams in his career. Very exclusive. All American original 6 teams also. So basically, he's just all American. Well, as we're talking about present day players, and we did do a little bit of a nod talking a little bit about Modano and players of the past, but for today's episode, we're going to go with our Throwback Thursday segment. We're going to go back to 2002, Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Finals on June 8th. And this was a game in which, looking back at the finals, the Red Wings lost the opening game of the Stanley Cup Final in overtime to the Carolina Hurricanes. They came back and won Game 2. But Game 3, this is one of those swing games. We're going back to Carolina here. Those first 2 games were in Detroit. Obviously, Detroit was running away with the league that year. Like we had talked about in a previous throwback, was Game 7 between the Avalanche and the Red Wings in the Western Conference Final. The Red Wings were down 3-2 in that final, and so they had to fight back to even get to the Stanley Cup Final. So to be further into the playoffs and maybe have to crawl out of another hole wouldn't have been the best for the Red Wings. They definitely seem like the Goliath of the two entering the series, but Carolina coming out and surprising them in that first game really took a lot of people by storm. And a lot of people were saying, well, obviously it's not going to be a sweep. So really, how competitive is this series going to be? And Game 3 went triple overtime. So for a game like that to go triple overtime, a possible, swing the momentum, the Red Wings won in triple overtime. Looking at it, they fell into a 1-0 hole with 15 minutes into the first, and they fell into a 2-1 hole 7 minutes into the third. So with a little over a minute to go, the Red Wings, a little over a minute to go in the third period. So I'm guessing they've pulled Hasek by now, and they've got the 6-on-5 going. So Brett Hull scores with about maybe a minute 30 left to go in regulation to force overtime. This game went triple overtime. Speaking of triple overtime, Brett Hull, no stranger to late theatrics and no stranger to overtime in the Stanley Cup Final in '99 for the Stars. He's the one who clinched the cup for the Dallas Stars, and believe it was double, maybe even no, it might have actually been triple overtime against Dominic Hasek and the Buffalo Sabres in '99. So no stranger, Hall of Famer, obviously. And so who was on the assist for the goal? Lidstrom and Fedorov. So we got Hull from Lidstrom and Fedorov. That's 3 Hall of Famers on a goal. Not to mention the fact that earlier in the game, the first goal that was scored by the Red Wings was scored by yet another future Hall of Famer, in Igor Larionov. Well, who gets the overtime game winner? That's right, future Hall of Famer Igor Larionov. His second goal of the night clinches it. A couple of notes from that game, though. Hasek had 41 saves. Pretty impressive, but what's even more impressive was the hard luck loser of the game, Arturs Irbe, who had 50 saves, so basically faced 53 shots, only let 3 behind him, including, obviously, shot number 53 by Larionov. So it really shifted the momentum. The Red Wings could have been down 1-2 with one more game on the road before heading back to Joe Louis Arena. So you can look back at some of these moments that really give you that bounce the right way. The Red Wings went on to win that Stanley Cup. That was the swan song, I guess. Nobody knew it until he mentioned it to Ron Francis in the handshake. But yeah, it was the swan song for Scotty Bowman, his 9th and final title as a coach in the NHL. Obviously, that's a record. And the Red Wings they were a very dominant team that year. One of my favorite teams to look back on is the 01-02 Red Wings. They called it Code Red in ESPN, the magazine. I kept the cover looking at it. I think there are 11 Hall of Famers from that team. Fedorov, Yzerman, Shanahan, Larionov, Datsuk was even on that team. Young Datsuk was coming up there, and you've seen the videos where Hull said he was like the filthiest, sickest player he's ever seen. Well, that was around the time that he came into his own in the league as a rookie, I believe. If not, he was very little in there the year before, because I'm pretty sure that was his rookie campaign. But very young Datsuk wins it. I believe he got a goal in the final game of that playoffs. No, actually, we talked about that. That was from the 2008. So, Datsuk factoring in however he can, but you got golden jacket wearing Hall of Famers all across the board, sitting on the bench, future Hall of Famers. Like I said, I think it's the numbers either at 10 or 11. I'm pretty sure with Datsuk it made 11. Larionov, Luke Robitaille, Chris Chelios, Brett Hull. I already said Shanahan, Fedorov, Yzerman. I already said Larionov, Dominik Hasek. Obviously, do not overlook that guy. So and Stevie Weiss. So we've looking at a team like that. It's always a special time, and to think that they were that close to falling into an even deeper hole, deeper into the playoffs than they had been. They were still able to overcome, basically buck the odds, if you will, and really shine and win for the third, win their third Stanley Cup in 6 years at that point, basically solidifying themselves a dynasty. So we're looking to this rebuild right now to see when the Red Wings can get back into those playoffs and start to build yet another dynasty as they have in the past before. Trust the Yzer plan, as we always say. The Yzer plan and trust the rebuild is another term I've heard plenty of times from Red Wings fans. So until tomorrow, we'll see how the Red Wings do tonight against Vancouver. This has been Red Wings Daily. I'm your host, Kirk MckNight, LGRW from the PNW.